Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
I was working as a part-time assistant at a university planetarium. It wasn't a big, flashy place, just a domed theater where we'd host school field trips, occasional public viewings, and the odd lecture. Most of my job involved setting up the projector, keeping things clean, and making sure guests didn't mess with the equipment. One evening, we had a private event scheduled. A small astronomy club had booked the planetarium for a members-only stargazing presentation. There were about 20 people in attendance, and everything was running smoothly. The doors were locked once everyone was inside, which was standard practice to prevent random people from wandering in. Halfway through the presentation, I stepped out to check the lobby. The planetarium was part of a larger science building, and at that time of night, everything outside our little dome was empty, just dark hallways and locked classrooms. But as I was walking past the glass doors leading to the main entrance, I saw him, a man standing just outside, looking in. At first, I assumed he was a late arrival. He wasn't doing anything particularly strange, just standing there, hands in his coat pockets. But something felt off. Maybe it was the way he was positioned, too still, too rigid. Or maybe it was the fact that his face was just slightly turned away, as if he was avoiding looking directly at me. I walked over, pulling out my key to unlock the door. Before I did, I gestured through the glass, mouthing, "Are you here for the event?" No response. He didn't nod, didn't wave, didn't move at all. I tried again. "Sir, nothing." At this point, I was getting uneasy. The doors were locked, and no one should have been able to enter the building without an access card. I turned to go back inside, deciding to let security handle it. When I looked over my shoulder, he was closer, not pressed against the glass, but definitely nearer than before. His head was tilted now, like he was listening. I booked it back inside the dome, closing the doors behind me. The show was still running, everyone inside oblivious to what was happening. I went straight to the control panel and pulled up the security camera feed for the lobby. The man was gone. I stared at the screen, rewinding the footage, my heart pounding. The last frame before he disappeared showed him taking a step away from the door. But after that, nothing. No movement, no shadow, just an empty hallway. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, I asked campus security if they had any footage of the entrance. They checked the logs. According to the system, no one had entered or exited the building during the time I saw the man. I still don't know who he was, or how he got inside, or why he left so suddenly, but I do know one thing. A few weeks later, one of my coworkers came in early to set up for a morning event. When she unlocked the planetarium doors, she found something waiting just inside the entrance. A single footprint, pressed into the carpet, facing inward. After my coworker found the footprint, she brushed it off as a mistake. Maybe a custodian had stepped inside before the carpet was vacuumed. I wasn't so sure. For one, the planetarium doors had been locked all night. No custodians had access to the dome without requesting it first, and they never cleaned in there unless asked. Second, the footprint was barefoot, low shoe tread, no sock fuzz, just the distinct outline of a foot pressed into the soft carpet, like someone had been standing there, waiting. At this point, I was getting paranoid. I started arriving earlier than my shifts to check the doors, making sure they were locked and nothing was out of place. I kept an eye on the security feeds whenever I could, though I never saw anything unusual, just an empty lobby, dark hallways, and the occasional professor passing by. Then, about 2 weeks after the footprint, something happened that finally pushed me over the edge. We were hosting another evening event, a lecture about exoplanets. It was well attended, with around 30 people inside. The dome was dimly lit as the presenter spoke, their voice echoing across the curved walls. I was sitting in the back, monitoring the projector when I felt it. A shift in the air. I don't know how else to describe it. You know that feeling when someone enters a room behind you. That slight change in pressure, the awareness that you're no longer alone. That's what it felt like. I turned my head. There, at the very back of the planetarium, standing against the wall, was a man. Not sitting, not moving, just standing in the shadows, as still as a statue. My stomach dropped. He wasn't there before. I would have seen him enter. The only doors to the planetarium were at the front, and no one had walked past me. And yet, there he was. I couldn't see his face clearly in the dim light, but his posture was unnerving. He wasn't watching the presentation like everyone else. He was angled toward me. I felt my breath catch in my throat. For a few seconds, I just stared, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe he was a latecomer. Maybe I had somehow mistook walking in. But as I sat there, frozen, something clicked in my mind. This fit. He wasn't wearing shoes. I shot up from my seat and stepped toward the exit, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the key to the control panel. My plan was was simple: get outside, call security, and let them deal with it. But the second I turned back, he was gone. It just vanished. No movement, no sound, nothing. I scanned the room. No doors had opened. No one else seemed to have noticed anything unusual. It was like he had never been there at all. I barely made it through the rest of my shift. The moment the event ended, I grabbed my stuff and left. I told my supervisor I was sick and never worked another night shift at the planetarium again. But here's the thing that still haunts me. A few weeks after I quit, I ran into one of the older professors who had worked at the university for decades. We made small talk, and I casually mentioned that I had left my job at the planetarium. She gave me a knowing look. "That place has always been strange," she said, stirring her coffee. "You're not the first to see him." I felt my blood really cold. "Him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded. "The man with no shoes. He has been sent there for years." I never went back. After that conversation with the professor, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had barely scratched the surface of something much bigger. The fact that other people had seen him, the man with no shoes, made it worse. It meant that whatever had happened to me wasn't just paranoia. It was real, but I wasn't about to investigate. I had already quit, and as far as I was concerned, the planetarium and whatever haunted it was someone else's problem. At least, that's what I told myself. But some places don't let you go so easily. About a month after quitting, I was settling into my new job, a much less creepy office gig, when I got a phone call from an unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't have answered, but something about it made me hesitate. I picked up. At first, there was nothing, just silence. "Hello?" I asked. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating, and then, finally, a whisper, so faint I almost didn't hear it. "You left the door open." My stomach dropped. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I just sat there, the phone pressed against my ear, every muscle in my body locked in place. And then the line went dead. I checked the call log. No number, no trace. Like the call had never happened. I should have let it go. I should have ignored it, deleted the number, and moved on with my life. But the words "you left the door open" wouldn't leave my head. Looked away. Was he talking about the planetarium? Against my better judgment, I decided to go back, just once. Not inside, just outside, just to look, maybe to prove to myself that it was all in my head. So one evening, about an hour before sunset, I drove to the campus. The science building was quiet, most of the staff gone for the day. I parked in the lot and walked to the glass doors leading to the lobby. In froze, because he was inside, standing in the middle of the darkened planetarium lobby, facing the glass, face away, no shoes, no expression, just standing there, hands at his sides, head tilted slightly like he was listening. My entire body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. I couldn't blink. Then he lifted his hand, not to wave, not to gesture, just his index finger, raising it slowly, pressing it to the glass. Pointed at me. I turned and ran. I don't even remember getting to my car. I just remember the overwhelming sense of wrongness, like I had made a huge mistake by coming back. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away. I never went back. Not to the planetarium, not to the university, not even to that side of town. For a while, nothing happened. No more phone calls. No more strange encounters. I started to believe I was finally free. And then, one night, as I was lying in bed, a notification. An airdrop request from an unknown device. Just a single image. I opened it. It was a photo of the planetarium doors, taken from inside. I never liked waiting for the bus at night. There was something unsettling about the flickering streetlight overhead, the way the shadows stretched unnaturally long across the pavement. But my shift at the bookstore ended late, and I didn't have much of a choice. That night, the streets were unusually empty. The usual distant hum of the city was eerily muted, as if the world had paused for just a moment. I checked my phone, 10 minutes until the bus arrived. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. I turned my head just enough to see someone approaching from down the block. A man, tall and thin, dressed in a coat that looked too big for him. His face was shadowed beneath the hood he wore, but I could feel his eyes on me. I pulled my bag onto my lap, gripping the strap tightly. I wasn't new to strange encounters in the city, but something about him made my skin crawl. He stopped a few feet away from the bus stop, just standing there, not looking at his phone, not lighting a cigarette, just watching. The air felt thick, suffocating. I glanced back down the street, hoping to see headlights in the distance, but the road remained dark. Then he took a step closer. I felt my entire body tense, but I didn't move. I didn't want it to know I was afraid. "Do you know what time it is?" His voice was hoarse, almost too quiet to hear over the distant hum of the streetlights. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "It's, almost 10. He nodded. Another step closer, waiting for the bus. I didn't answer. I didn't want to encourage conversation. Then he did something that made my stomach drop. He smiled, not a normal smile, not a polite, passing grin. It was too wide, too forced, like he was mimicking something he had seen but never quite understood. "You should take the next next one, he said. My heart hammered. I plan to. His head tilted slightly. No, you should take the next one. I stared at him, my fingers digging into my bag. His smile remained unblinking. I glanced down the street again, still no bus in sight. Then, from somewhere close, I heard another set of footsteps. My breath caught. A second man stepped out from behind the bus shelter, one I hadn't noticed before. He was dressed similarly, oversized coat, hood low over his face. How long had he been standing there? I shot up from the bench, my pulse roaring in my ears. No, the first man said, almost laughing. Stay. I didn't. I bolted, nearly tripping over the curb as I ran down the street. I didn't care where, I just needed to get away. I didn't look back, not until I reached the next intersection where a small corner store was still open. I ducked inside, my chest heaving. To the glass door, I saw both of them standing where I had been just moments before, watching me. The bus arrived then. I half expected them to board, to follow, but they didn't. They just stood there as the doors opened and closed, as the bus pulled away into the night. I never saw them again, but from that night on, I never waited alone at the bus stop, and I never ever took the last bus. I told myself it was a one-time thing, a weird, unsettling encounter in the city, nothing more. People were strange, some were dangerous. I had been lucky, but then, a week later, I saw them again. It was late, just past 9. I had made a habit of leaving work earlier since that night, taking a different route home, even switching up my bus stops. But it was raining, and my usual stop was farther away. Against my better judgment, I went back to the one where it happened. The street light was still flickering, casting uneven shadows. I checked my phone, 7 minutes until the bus arrived. I adjusted my scarf, trying to ignore the creepy feeling in my spine. Maybe I was paranoid, but something felt off. The street was too quiet. Then I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. I didn't turn around immediately. My fingers curled around the strap of my bag, my breath tight in my chest. I wanted to believe it was just another pedestrian, some random person on their way home. But when I finally looked over my shoulder, my stomach turned to ice. It was him, the same oversized coat, the same low hood, the same eerie, unnatural smile. He stood at the edge of the sidewalk, just beyond the glow of the street light, half hidden in the shadows. And he wasn't alone. The second man was there too, standing just behind him. But this time, there was a third. My pulse pounded in my ears. I forced myself to stay calm, to act like I hadn't seen them, but I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waited. I turned back to the street. Where was the damn bus? The air felt thick. Electric was something I didn't understand. I didn't hear them move, but I knew they were getting closer. A whisper of fabric, a shuffle of feet. I glanced at my phone. 4 minutes. I took a slow step back, then another. My hands trembled, but I kept my expression neutral. If I ran, they would follow. Then the first man spoke. You didn't listen. His voice was almost playful, amused. I swallowed hard. What? His grin widened. I told you. You should have taken the next one. I turned and bolted. I didn't care about the bus. I didn't care where I was going. I just ran. The moment I moved, so did they. I heard them behind me. Quick, steady footsteps, too controlled to be frantic. They weren't running to catch up. They were hunting. I veered left, nearly slipping on the wet pavement, ducking into a narrow alley. My breath came fast and ragged, my lungs burning. I didn't dare look back. Then, blinding lights, a horn blared. I stumbled into the street, right in front of a car. The tires screeched as the driver slammed the brakes. I threw up my hands, my heart hammered as the vehicle stopped just inches from me. The driver, a middle-aged man with glasses, shouted something, but I wasn't listening, because when I turned back toward the alley, they were gone, just gone. No footsteps, no shadows, nothing. I stood there, panting, rain dripping down my face. The driver rolled down his window, his expression shifting from anger to concern. You okay? He asked. I could barely nod. He hesitated, then motioned to the passenger seat. Look, I don't know what's going on, but if someone's after you, I can give you a ride. No funny business, I promise. Everything in me screamed not to trust him, but when I looked back at the alley, at the empty darkness where they had been, I knew I couldn't stay there. I got in. The car smelled like coffee and old leather. The radio hummed softly, some classic rock station barely audible under the rain. The driver glanced at me. He wanted to tell me what that was about. I shook my head. I don't know. He sighed, gripping the wheel. All right. Where to? I hesitated, then gave him the name of a diner I knew stayed open late. Somewhere bright, somewhere with people. As he pulled away from the curb, I finally let myself breathe. But when I glanced in the side mirror, my stomach turned to lead. There, standing under the flickering street light, was the first man, smiling, and this time, he raised his hand and waved. The drive to the diner was silent. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see those men following us, but the rain had swallowed them up. The driver, his name was Tom, kept his eyes on the road, his fingers tapping anxiously on the steering wheel. You sure you don't want to call the cops? He asked. I considered it, but what would I say? 3 men stood at my bus stop and smiled at me. It sounded ridiculous. ridiculous. There had been no threats, no weapons, nothing technically illegal, just a growing, gnawing sense that something was very, very wrong. I shook my head. I don't think they'd do anything. Tom exhaled sharply through his nose but didn't push. When we pulled up to the diner, I felt a strange relief seeing its familiar neon sign flickering in the rain. The place wasn't packed, but it was busy enough, safe enough. I turned to Tom and thank you. Seriously. He gave me a small nod. Be careful, kid. I climbed out of the car and hurried inside, the bell above the door jangling. The warmth of the diner hit me instantly, along with the smell of coffee and fried food. I slid into a booth in the back, my hands still shaking. I ordered coffee. I needed something to focus on, something to ground me. The waitress, a kind-looking woman in her 50 seconds, gave me a once-over like she could tell something was off. You okay, Todd? She asked. I hesitated, then forced a smile. Just a long night. She nodded knowingly. You let me know if you need anything. I wrapped my hands around the warm coffee cup, trying to shake the chill that had settled into my bones. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from my roommate, Maya. Maya, where are you? Thought you were coming home. I hesitated, then typed back, something weird happened. At the diner. I'll tell you later. The read receipt popped up instantly. A second later, she was calling me. I picked up. Are you okay? Her voice was sharp with concern. Yeah, I lied. I saw those guys again. Silence. Then, what guys? I frowned. The ones I told you about. The bus stop. Last week. Another pause. You didn't tell me about any guys. My blood ran cold. Yes, I did. I said slowly. That night, I texted you. I said some weird guys were at the bus stop, and you told me to get an Uber home. I never got that text. I pulled my phone away from my ear, quickly scrolling through our messages. My hands trembled as I searched for proof, anything to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. But the message wasn't there. My stomach twisted. I know I sent it. Come home. Maya said, Dale. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Yep, okay. I hung up and tossed some cash onto the table, barely touching my coffee. The diner felt suffocating now, the walls pressing in. I stepped outside into the rain, pulling my jacket tighter around me. The street was empty, the city sounds muffled by the downpour. I took a breath, steadying myself. Then I heard it. A whisper, not words, just a sound soft and wrong, like breath against my ear. I turned sharply, but the street was empty. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the sidewalk for a brief second. And in that moment, I saw them across the street, standing perfectly still, watching, not three of them now. Thor. I staggered back, my heart hammering. My brain screamed at me to run, to get inside, to do something. But my body was frozen. The first man, the one who had spoken to me before, took a step forward. I choked on a breath. Then he pointed at me, not a casual gesture, not a wave, just a slow, deliberate lift of his arm, his finger extending toward me as if he had been waiting for this moment. The streetlight above me flickered once, then went out. Darkness swallowed everything. I read. I don't remember how I got hold of me. The entire night blurred together into a frantic haze of sprinting, checking over my shoulder, fumbling with my keys. When I finally slammed the door behind me, Maya was already waiting in the living room, looking terrified. What the hell happened? She demanded. I opened my mouth to answer, but then I saw something over her shoulder. The window, and outside, just beyond the glass, standing under the street lamp across the road. 5 of them now. There's a mall in my city that was supposed to be the biggest shopping center in the region. Construction started, but halfway through, the funding ran out. Instead of finishing it, the developers just stopped. No one ever bought the property, and it sat there, a hollow skeleton of escalators that led nowhere, storefronts without windows, and wide, empty corridors filled with dust and silence. At the time, I was in college, and I had a friend, Jake, who was always looking for weird places to explore. One night, he convinced me and our friend Sam to check it out. Just a quick walkthrough, he promised. It's like urban exploring, but not illegal because technically it's still city owned. I wasn't thrilled, but I agreed. So just after midnight, we parked a little way down the road and climbed through a section of broken fencing. It was eerie inside. The place was massive, with unfinished tile floors, exposed wiring, and scaffolding still standing in some spots. Our flashlights barely cut through the dark, and the air smelled like damp concrete. We wandered for about half an hour, taking pictures and daring each other to go into the darker corners. At one point, we found what would have been the food court, complete with abandoned counters and empty menu boards. It was oddly one of the only places that had chairs, scattered haphazardly around like someone had been moving them. Then we heard the footsteps, not ours, not an echo. They were slow and deliberate, coming from the other side of the food court. We froze. Jake clicked off his flashlight, and Sam and I followed. We crouched behind a counter, barely breathing. The footsteps came closer, slow, studying. Then a dragging sound, like something heavy was being pulled across the floor. I wanted to run, but Jake Jake motioned for us to stay put. The sound stopped for a moment, and in the silence, I swear I heard breathing. Heavy, labored, like whoever was there had been walking for a long, long time. And then, from the darkness, a voice. I said you, not shouted, not whispered, just stated. We bolted. I didn't even care about being quiet anymore. We ran the way we came, dodging scaffolding and debris, our footsteps echoing wildly. I could hear something moving behind us, faster now. By some miracle, we made it back to the hole in the fence and practically threw ourselves through it. We didn't stop running until we reached the car. We didn't look back. I don't know who or what was in that mall, but I know this as we peeled out of there. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Into the dim light of our taillights, I saw someone standing just inside the fence, watching us. Jake wanted to go back the next night. Sam and I refused. A few months later, the city finally demolished the place. I don't know if they found anything inside, and I don't want to. I wish that was the end of it. After that night, I tried to forget about what happened. I told myself it was just a homeless person squatting in the abandoned mall. Maybe someone messing with us. Maybe even another group of explorers. But deep down, I knew better. That voice, it wasn't right. It wasn't angry. It wasn't curious. It was just stating a fact. I said you. The worst part, it didn't feel like a first-time encounter. A few months passed, and the city finally began demolishing the mall. I should have been relieved, but when I saw the news, something sent a chill through me. A construction worker was injured during the demolition. The article didn't go into much detail, but it mentioned that he had fallen while inspecting the structure at night. Witnesses reported hearing someone inside, someone who wasn't supposed to be there. One of the workers, who had been part of the initial walkthrough, quit the next day. A rumor started circulating among the crew that he had seen something in the ruins, something that made him leave town entirely. I wouldn't have given it much thought, except about a week later, I started feeling like I was being watched. At first, it was just little things. A prickling sensation on the back of my neck when I walked to my car after work. A shadow that moved just out of my peripheral vision. My roommates, who knew nothing about that night in the mall, started mentioning weird things too. The front door would be unlocked when none of us had touched it. The kitchen chairs sometimes weren't where we left them. And then, one night, I woke up to footsteps in my apartment. I shot up in bed, heart pounding. I knew my roommates were both out of town for the weekend. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, familiar. I reached for my phone, trying to keep my breathing steady. Then, the voice, I saw you. I don't remember much after that. I think I blacked out from fear because the next thing I knew, it was morning. My door was locked. My apartment was silent, but something had changed. Every single chair in my kitchen was turned to face my bedroom door. I moved out 2 weeks later. I told my roommates it was for work. I don't talk to Jake anymore. After that night in the mall, he became obsessed with finding answers. He started digging into old property records, trying to figure out if something had happened there before the mall was built. He called me at weird hours, rambling about patterns and something unfinished. Then, one day, he just disappeared. His family filed a missing persons report, but nothing ever came of it. The last message he sent me was 3 words long. He found me. I don't know what happened to Jake. I don't know if he ran, or if something finally caught up to him. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in my apartment, I hear footsteps, and I know that if I ever hear that voice again, I won't be waking up the next morning. It's been 3 years since Jake disappeared. I wish I could say I moved on. I wish I could say I never looked back, but I did. After Jake vanished, I tried to live a normal life. I transferred to a different college in another city, started fresh. New apartment, new job, new friends. For a while, it worked. Then, last week, I got an email. No sender, no subject, no text, just an attachment. It was a video. I hesitated before opening it, my gut already telling me I wouldn't like what I saw, but curiosity won out. It was grainy, low resolution, probably from an old phone. The footage was shaky, bouncing as if someone was holding the camera at their side while walking. The timestamp in the corner read 4:12 a.m. I recognized the place immediately. It was the unfinished mall, except it was different now. The mall had been demolished, but the video showed something else. A long, dimly lit corridor, concrete walls stretching out endlessly, doors lining each side. The hallway looked wrong, the proportions slightly off, as if the walls were too tall and the doors too narrow. The person filming stopped in front of one of the doors. There was no handle, no markings, just a smooth, featureless metal surface. Then the breathing started, heavy, labored, right next to the microphone. The camera panned, slow and shaky, down to the floor. There were footsteps in the dust, not just one set, several, leading in and out of the door, some deeper, as if someone had stood there for a long time. The person behind the camera whispered something. I had to replay it 3 times before I caught the words. That alone. Then the video cut to static. I sat there, staring at my screen, feeling that old, familiar dread creeping back. And then I heard it. Not from the video, not from my laptop, from my apartment. A slow, steady dragging sound coming from the hallway outside my bedroom. I didn't move, didn't didn't breathe, just listened. Then the voice, I said you. I don't remember running, but somehow I made it out. I spent the night in my car, parked in a crowded lot, doors locked, phone clutched in my hand. By morning, my apartment was untouched. Nothing was out of place, no footprints, no sign anyone had ever been there, except for my chairs. Every single one was turned to face my bedroom door. I don't know what's happening. I don't know where Jake is, but I think I made a mistake. I should have left him all alone. I should have never gone inside. I've never liked swimming pools. People always thought it was because I couldn't swim well, but that wasn't it. It wasn't the water. It was what happened when I was 14. My high school had an old indoor pool, part of the original building from the 60 seconds. It was deep, like unnecessarily deep, nearly 14 feet at one end. That's where the diving boards had been back when they still had them. By the time I was in school, the boards were removed, but the depth remained. One afternoon, I had swim practice after school. I wasn't on the team, just taking the class to fill a PE credit. The others had already left, and the only person still in the building was the janitor mopping the locker room floors. I was a slow changer, and by the time I stepped back into the pool area, the lights had been dimmed to save power. The water looked darker than usual, almost black. I don't know why I did it. Maybe because I had the whole pool to myself. Maybe because I wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't scared of it. I walked over to the deep end and sat on the edge, letting my feet dangle in. That's when I felt it. A hand, not grabbing, not pulling, just touching. Light, but unmistakable. Right at my ankle. I yanked my legs up and scrambled back so fast I nearly slipped. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the water. It wasn't moving. Nothing had broken the surface. The ripples from my feet had already smoothed out. I wanted to believe it was my imagination, but then I saw them down at the bottom of the pool, eyes wide, staring, a pale face, blurred by the water, gazing straight up at me, mouth slightly open as if exhaling, but no bubbles rose, no movement at all. I should have screamed. I should have run, but I couldn't move. The face shifted, not like it swam, but like it was rising slowly and possibly closer to the surface, closer to me. I bolted. I don't remember getting dressed. I don't remember grabbing my bag. The next thing I knew, I was outside, breathing hard in the cold air, my pulse slamming against my skull. I didn't tell anyone. What would I even say? That there was someone in the pool, that it touched me, that I saw them looking at me. But here's the thing, the pool had been closed all weekend before that for cleaning. They drained it completely. If someone had drowned, they would have found a body. So what the hell did I see? I never went back in that pool again. I transferred out of the class. But sometimes, even now, when I pass by a deep, still body of water, I feel it again. That light, lingering touch, like something is still waiting. I tried to forget. Really, I did. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, my mind playing games, maybe even the exhaustion from practice. But I knew better. The thing in the pool saw me, and worse, it touched me. A week passed. I avoided the pool completely, making excuses, staying as far from the locker rooms as possible. But on Friday, as I was packing up to go home, my friend Mike stopped me. "Hey, coach is pissed at you," he said, half laughing. "He says you haven't been in the water all week. What's up with that?" I shrugged, just sick of it, man. Mike squinted at me. "You love swimming." I didn't answer. "You coming to the meet tomorrow?" I hesitated. Our school was hosting, so the pool would be full of people, safe. But the thought of even looking at the water made my stomach turn. Mike nudged me. "Come on, dude, just come hang out. You don't even have to swim." I wanted to say no. I should have said no, but I went. The meet started at noon. The pool was bright and loud, filled with teams from other schools, the air thick with chlorine and echoes. It was easier to ignore the deep end when there were people everywhere. But then, sometime around the last relay, I noticed something strange. The water, right where I had sat that day, was still. Not completely, of course. People were swimming. Waves rolled across the surface, but there, at the very edge of the deep end, the ripples seemed rugged, like something underneath was resisting. I turned away, shaking it off. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was just a whistle blew. Someone had jumped in out of turn, and the coach was yelling. The swimmers in the lane surfaced, except for one, Chris, one of our best. He hadn't come up. The water where he had been swimming was calm, too calm. The yelling stopped. The silence that followed lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like forever. Then chaos. Someone dove in. The assistant coach grabbed the long rescue pole. Parents were on their feet. I saw Mike's face, pale, frozen, and then Chris surfaced, alone. He was gasping, thrashing wildly, eyes wide in terror. He coughed, choking on water. They pulled me down. The assistant coach dragged him to the edge. He was shaking, his lips blew. "There's no one down there," the coach said, trying to calm him. "You got a cramp, that's all." "No." Chris slammed his fist against the pool deck, furious. Someone grabbed me. I didn't realize I was backing away until my shoulder hit the wall. My heart was hammering. The lifeguard on duty, a senior girl, shook her head. I was watching. Nobody else went under. But Chris wasn't lying. I knew, because I saw it too. The same face, the same eyes, staring up from the deep. But this time, they were more threatened. Chris refused to get back in the water. They pulled him aside, wrapped him in towels, and someone called the nurse. He kept shaking his head, repeating the same thing over and over. They grabbed me. They wouldn't let go. I didn't say anything. What could I say? That I believed him. That I'd seen them too. Nobody wanted to acknowledge how wrong it was. How it didn't make sense. How something down there was waiting. The meet ended early. I was glad. I just wanted to go home. But as I was leaving, Mike stopped me again. Dude, his voice was low, like he didn't want anyone to hear. You saw it, didn't you? I felt my stomach drop. What are you talking about? Mike's jaw tightened. Don't play dumb. I saw your face. You saw whatever the hell that was. I hesitated. Chris, he must have. Don't. Mike cut me off. Don't say he imagined it. I swallowed hard. He let Eb. You know about the kid, right? My pulse jumped. What kid? Mike glanced over his shoulder, lowering his voice even more. A long time ago, like, before we were born, some kid drowned in that pool. People say it was an accident, but he exhaled. There were rumors that the kid was pulled under, that he was screaming when they found him. I felt cold all over, and the worst part, Mike continued, ever since then, people say sometimes, if you're alone, or if you're near the deep end too long. I didn't want to hear it. I already knew what he was going to say. They tried to pull you down too. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them again. The pale faces, the reaching hands. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something. They weren't just waiting down there. They were growing. Chris had been in the pool for years, and nothing had happened to him before. So by now, and then it hit me. They had sailed me first. That day I sat at the edge. The day I let my feet dangle into the water. They touched me. They noticed me. And now, it was like they were getting stronger. First, it was just one. But then, when they grabbed Chris, there were more. Like something was spreading. Like something was waking up. I never went near the pool again. Chris transferred schools a month later. Mike told me his parents pulled him out. Said he refused to even shower if the drain was too deep. He didn't answer any of my texts. I didn't blame him. But the pool, they kept using it. Swim meets, classes, practices. Like nothing ever happened. Like the water wasn't hungry. I don't know if anyone else has felt it since. I don't want to know. But sometimes, when I hear about a freak accident, a cramp, a kid slipping under, someone drowning too fast, I was on a solo trip along the coast, the kind of getaway where you try to find yourself or whatever. I'd taken up photography in a half-hearted attempt to stay offline, so I spent a lot of time wandering the rocky shores with my camera, snapping pictures of crabs, anemones, and the occasional stranded jellyfish. One afternoon, I came across a set of tide pools I hadn't seen before. They were carved into jagged black rock, deep enough to be filled with seawater even though the tide was pulling out. It was the perfect spot, untouched, no tourists, just the sound of distant waves. Then I saw her. She was crouched near the edge of one of the deeper pools, her long hair tangled and damp, her bare feet gripping the slick rock like she'd been there forever. She wasn't wearing a wetsuit, just a threadbare white dress clinging to her skin. I was startled but managed a polite, "Hey." She turned her head slightly, not quite looking at me, but enough that I saw her profile, sharp cheekbones, pale skin, dark eyes too large for her face. She had a small, almost smiling expression, like she knew something I didn't. "What are you doing out here?" I asked. She dipped her fingers into the water, stirring the reflection. Looking for what? Her fingers stilled, and she finally looked at me full on. You shouldn't be here. Something about her voice made the hairs on my arms rise. It wasn't a threat, exactly, more like a warning. I let out a nervous chuckle. I was just taking pictures. She blinked slowly, then reached down into the pool, deeper than I thought it should be, up to her elbow. When she pulled her hand out, something long and thin wriggled between her fingers. A dark eel, or maybe a piece of seaweed. I couldn't tell. She let it slide back into the water, then stood up in one fluid motion. "You should go," she said again, softer this time, and then she turned and walked straight into the water, not towards the shore, but towards the open sea. The water barely rippled around her legs, even though the waves were rougher out there. I watched until she was too far to make out clearly. I don't know why I didn't call out, or try to stop her. I just stood there, frozen, my camera hanging useless at my side. When I finally moved, it was to snap a photo of the tide pool she had been kneeling beside. It wasn't until later, when I looked at the picture, that I noticed something strange. There was no reflection reflection, not of me, not of the sky, not of here, just empty, black water. I left the coast the next morning. I tried to tell myself it was just a weird encounter, that maybe she had been some kind of free diver or a local who knew the coastline better than I did. But even as I packed up my things the next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I kept the photo. I don't know why, maybe to convince myself later that I hadn't imagined it, that the water in the tide pool really had been void of any reflection, like a hole punched through the world. I didn't even look at it again until months later. Life went on. I returned home, went back to work, let the trip fade into memory like any other, but I never stopped feeling uneasy about what happened. One night, I was scrolling through my camera roll, clearing out old pictures. That's when I found it again, the tide pool photo, the black water, but this time there was something new, a shape. At first, I thought it was a shadow or a smudge on my screen, but the more I looked, the more certain I became. There was something in the water, a figure just below the surface, barely visible against the inky void. I zoomed in, a face, her face, only it wasn't quite right. The eyes were too wide, the mouth slightly open as if caught mid-whisper. Her features were distorted by the rippling water, stretched and warped into something that almost wasn't human. I dropped my phone. I didn't sleep that night. After that, I started dreaming of the tide pools. In the dreams, I was always back at that rocky shore, standing at the edge of the black water. The woman was there too, crouched in the same position as before, her fingers trailing in the pool. But now, she was whispering. I could never understand the words, but I felt them heavy like the pull of deep water. They filled my head, made it hard to think. In every dream, I reached for her, whether to pull her away from the water or to follow, I couldn't say. But just before I could touch her, she would turn, and then I would wake up, every time, gasping for breath, my sheets damp with sweat. I stopped looking at the photo. I should have deleted it, but something about it felt, thank God, like if I got rid of it, it wouldn't really be gone. A year later, I moved to a new apartment, hoping a fresh start would help shake the unease that had settled over my life like a second skin. For a while, it worked. The dreams became less frequent. I started to feel normal again, until the night I heard the dripping. It started fade, just a soft pattering somewhere in my apartment. At first, I thought it was the sink, but the faucets were dry. I checked the ceiling, no leaks. Still, the sound continued. Drip, drip, drip. I followed the noise, my stomach knotting tighter with every step. It led me to my bedroom, to my nightstand, to my phone, and the screen was on, even though I hadn't touched it. The tide pool photo was open, and it had changed. The woman was no longer crouching. She was standing, closer to the surface, looking directly at me. I dropped the phone and backed away, my heart slamming against my ribs. The dripping sound grew louder, faster, filling the room with the rhythmic beat of something rising from the depths. I don't remember grabbing my keys. I don't remember running out the door. But the next thing I knew, I was in my car, hands shaking as I sped away from my apartment without a destination in mind. I didn't go back for 3 days. When I finally did, the first thing I did was delete the photo. Or at least, I tried. No matter what I did, it wouldn't go away. The file was locked, unresponsive. Every attempt to erase it failed. My phone restarted itself twice, and then the photo was just gone. Not in my gallery, not in the cloud, not even in my backups. Erased, as if it had never existed. But I know it did, and sometimes, when I pass by reflective surfaces, windows, puddles, even the glass of my microwave, I think I see something just at the edge of my vision. A shape, a face, watching, waited. I tried to move on after that. I really did, but something had changed. Even though the photo was gone, even though I had never looked at it again after that night, the feeling remained. That awful, creeping sense that I was being watched. It wasn't all the time, just in flashes. A glimpse in the corner of my eye when I passed by reflective surfaces. A feeling of something standing too close when I was alone in a room. A subtle weight in the air, like I wasn't the only one breathing it. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I had let that moment, that woman get into my head. But then the mirrors started to fog. It happened for the first time in my bathroom mirror. I had just stepped out of the shower when I noticed it, a handprint. It was faint, almost indistinguishable in the condensation that coated the glass. But it was there, too high to be mine, too thin to belong to anyone I knew. I wiped the mirror clean, chalking it up to some strange quirk of moisture or a trick of my own paranoia. But the next time it happened, I was nowhere near water. I was in my bedroom, getting ready for bed, when I glanced at my full-length mirror and saw the fog creeping along the edges of the glass. It didn't make sense. The room was cool, dry. There was no reason for condensation to be forming, and yet it was a slow, misty bloom, spreading in strange, swirly patterns, like something was breathing on the other side. I should have left. I should have turned away, broken the mirror, done anything but what I did. I stepped closer, and as I did, something moved within the glass. It wasn't my reflection. It looked like me at first. Same height, same shape, standing in the same spot. But the longer I stared, the more I realized something was wrong. The face was slightly off, the eyes too dark, the skin too pale. The mouth twitched at the corners as if struggling to hold a neutral expression, and then the head tilted, but I hadn't moved. I stumbled back, slamming into my dresser. My reflection, the thing in the glass, didn't follow. It just watched me, and then, slowly, its mouth opened. There was no sound, no breath, just the silent parting of lips, too wide, too hungry, like it was trying to speak but I'd forgotten how. I didn't wait. I yanked the mirror from the wall and shoved it face down onto the floor. That night, I barely slept. I got rid of every mirror in my apartment the next day. It didn't help. The fog still came. On windows, on black screens, even on the surface of my coffee table. It was fainter now, subtler, but I could still see it if I looked long enough. And the worst part, I think she's getting closer. I don't know how to explain it, but every time I catch a glimpse of that shape, that reflection that isn't mine, it feels, Eva, like she's closing the distance between wherever she is and where I am. A few nights ago, I woke up to the sound of dripping again. Only this time, it wasn't from my phone. It was coming from my closet. The air smelled of salt water. I didn't open the door. I didn't need to, because as I lay there, heart hammering in my chest, I heard something else. A soft, wet whisper, and it came from inside the room. I'm leaving tomorrow, packing whatever I can and getting as far from here as possible. But I don't think it will matter, because she isn't here. She's in the glass. Ink glasses everywhere. This happened a few years ago when I was stuck overnight at a regional airport due to a delayed connection. It wasn't one of the big hubs, more of a glorified airstrip with a handful of terminals, and by midnight, the place was practically deserted. I had been sitting near gate 9, charging my phone and trying to stay awake, when I heard an announcement crackle over the intercom. Final boarding call for flight 194, departing from gate 14. All passengers, please proceed to the gate immediately. That wasn't my flight. Mine wasn't leaving until early morning, and according to the app, the last scheduled departure had already taken off. Still, the announcement gave me a weird sense of relief, like maybe I wasn't alone in this empty airport after all. Curious, I got up and wandered toward gate 14. The lights above it flickered weakly, but no one was there. No attendant, no passengers, just an empty podium and a row of seats, all but one unoccupied. A man sat alone by the window, staring out at the tarmac. I hesitated, then walked past, pretending to be checking my phone. He didn't move, didn't glance at me, just kept watching the runway. His posture was rigid, and something about the way he was sitting, hands folded neatly in his lap, made my skin crawl. Another announcement echoed through the empty terminal. Final call for flight 194. Gate 14 is now closing. That was strange. The voice over the intercom sounded rugged, not garbled, not robotic, just slightly off, like someone mimicking a real voice but missing some subtle human inflection. I glanced at the empty podium again. No flight attendant, no boarding agent, and still, the man didn't move. Something made me check the departure boards. There was no flight 194 listed. I turned back to the gate. The jet bridge door was open now, leading to the plane outside, except there was no plane, just an empty tarmac stretching into the darkness. The man stood, not in a normal way. He moved too smoothly, too quickly, as if something was pulling him upright. His head turned toward me, but his face was rugged, too still. His eyes locked onto mine, and my whole body screamed at me to run. I turned and bolted. As I ran, I heard a final, chilling announcement. All passengers for flight 194, please proceed to boarding. I didn't stop running until I was back at the main concourse near the food court where the overnight cleaning crew was working. When I turned to look, gate 14 was gone. Not empty, gone, like it had never existed. The next morning, I checked with airport staff. The terminal only had 12 gates. There was no record of a gate 14. No flight 194. Nothing. I don't know what would have happened if I had stepped through that jet bridge. I don't want to know. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the food court, sipping a stale coffee from a vending machine, watching the airport staff go about their business as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't nearly walked through a gate that wasn't supposed to exist. My flight out was at 6:15 a.m. I stuck to the main areas, never venturing near the terminal where gate 14 had been. I didn't even look in that direction. When they called my flight, I boarded as quickly as possible, half expecting to hear another distorted announcement over the speakers. But the airport was normal again, completely mundane. Maybe I was losing it, maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe I had just barely escaped something I wasn't meant to see. I thought I could forget about it, move on, but then the dream started. At first, it was just flashes, empty terminals, flickering lights, distorted announcements echoing in the distance. Then the dream took shape. I would find myself standing at a terminal window, staring out at a runway that stretched forever into the dark. The airport was silent, no passengers, no staff, and then the announcement would come. Final call for flight 194. All passengers, please proceed to boarding. I turned, and he'd be there, the waiting man from gate 14. 14, sitting, hands folded in his lap, watching me. His face never changed, but I could feel something beneath the surface, something that shouldn't be there. The first few times, I woke up immediately, heart pounding, breath ragged, but each night, the dream lasted longer. One night, I couldn't wake up. I was stuck in the dream, standing in the empty airport, frozen in place as the announcement played on a loop. Final call for flight 194. Final call for flight 194. Final call for flight 194. The waiting man stood, his head turned, too smoothly, too quickly. And this time, he smiled. That was when I started screaming. That was when I finally woke up. But the worst part, when I checked my phone, there was a missed call at 3:14 a.m. No number, no caller ID, just the words, flight 194. Final call. I changed my number, moved to a different city, stopped flying whenever I could, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. A faint, distorted voice crackling through a speaker that isn't there. Final call for flight 194. And I wonder what happens if someone answers. I stopped flying for almost 2 years. I made excuses, road trips, trains, anything to avoid stepping foot in an airport again. But life has a way of cornering you. My sister was getting married across the country and she begged me to be there. I couldn't say no. I told myself it would be fine. A different airport, a busy flight, daytime. I booked the earliest departure possible just to be sure, but when I arrived, something felt off. There wasn't anything obvious, just a subtle wrongness. The lights flickered a little too much. The announcement seemed slightly delayed, like the speakers were processing each word before playing them. And the date 410, I swear it hadn't been there when I checked my flight details the night before. But now, as I walked past the gates, there it was. No flight listed, no passengers waiting, just the podium, empty and expected. I sped up, refusing to look at it. Just keep walking, just get under plane. But then, final call for flight 194. Gate 14 is now closing. I froze. It wasn't over. I wasn't safe. I turned slowly against every screaming instinct, and there he was, the waiting man. He sat in the same chair as before, hands folded in his lap, staring out the window. But this time, he turned his head as I looked, and he saw me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The announcement played again. Final call for flight 194. All passengers, please proceed to boarding. The air around me shifted. It felt like the whole airport was holding its breath. Then, the waiting man stood up. He moved with that same unnatural smoothness, like something wearing a human shape but not understanding how people are supposed to move. His mouth opened. No sound came out. Just a terrible, aching silence. And then, he took a step toward me. I ran. I didn't care if people stared. I didn't care if security thought I was losing my mind. I ran. But as I sprinted toward my gate, the airport stretched. The corridors seemed longer. The signs flickered, words twisting into unreadable shapes. Somewhere behind me, I heard footsteps. Not running, just walking. Studied, getting closer. Then, a hand, cold and wrong, brushed my shoulder. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember collapsing. But suddenly, people were around me. A TSA agent kneeling beside me, my boarding pass clutched in my shaking hands. Ma'am, are you okay? I looked up. The airport was normal again. Gate 14 was gone. I made it onto my flight. I sat by the window, gripping the armrest so hard my fingers went numb. As we taxied onto the runway, I forced myself to look outside, just to be sure. There, on the farthest stretch of the tarmac, where no plane should be, stood a jet bridge leading to nothing. And beside it, the waiting man watched our plane take off. His hands were still folded, and this time, he waved. I used to play the violin in a small community orchestra that rehearsed in a historic music hall on the edge of town. It wasn't a grand concert hall, just a modest, aging venue that had once been part of a private academy before the school shuttered decades ago. The town maintained it for performances, but it always felt forgotten, the kind of place you didn't think about until you had to be there. Our rehearsals were in the evenings, and in the colder months, that meant arriving in darkness. The parking lot was small, so most of us parked on the street and walked up the narrow side path to the back entrance. One night, I arrived a little early, expecting to find at least a few members inside tuning their instruments. Instead, the hall was eerily silent. The main doors were unlocked, and the hallway leading to the stage was dimly lit. The only sound was the faint hum of the building's heating system kicking on. I figured maybe I'd gotten the time wrong, so I wandered toward the main hall to check the schedule we kept near the conductor's podium. That's when I saw him. At first, I thought he was our conductor, a tall figure standing at the center of the stage, hands clasped behind his back, facing the empty seats. He was dressed in an old-fashioned tailcoat, the kind you'd associate with 19th century composers. I almost greeted him, but something made me stop. He didn't move, didn't turn his head, didn't acknowledge me at all. There was something about his posture that sent a prickle of unease down my spine, like he wasn't waiting for anyone, just standing there as if he belonged to the silence itself. I felt a strange, irrational pressure in my chest, like I shouldn't be there. I took a slow step back, the wooden floor creaked under my foot, and finally he moved. Not by turning his head, not by shifting his stance. Instead, both of his hands lifted simultaneously as if conducting an invisible orchestra. No battalion, no instrument, just those eerily smooth movements, as if he were coaxing sound out of the very air. I bolted, ran straight back to the entrance, barely remembering to grab the door handle before shoving it open. The cold night air hit me like a shock, and I kept running until I reached my car. I sat there for a long moment, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a historical reenactor, some weird art installation I hadn't been told about. Then, my phone buzzed with a message from a fellow orchestra member. Rehearsals cancelled, powers out in the hull. No one's there tonight. Sorry for the late notice. No one can. I stared at the building, where the dim emergency lighting still glowed through the windows. Then, I saw the stage lights flicker just once, like an old candle sputtering out. I didn't stick around. I never brought it up to the others. Never stayed alone in that hall again. And every time I performed there after that night, I made sure to never look at the conductor's podium once the music stopped. I never told anyone about what I saw that night, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every rehearsal after that, I felt something, a presence. Nothing I could describe in words, just a weight in the air, like someone unseen was always watching. I avoided the stage when I didn't have to be there. I made sure to never be the first to arrive or the last to leave. But despite my precautions, the feeling never went away. Then came the night of our winter concert. The hall was packed with families, friends, and locals who enjoyed live performances. The lights were bright, the energy lively. For the first time since my encounter, I felt safe. Until I saw the program, I hadn't looked at it before, assuming it would be the usual mix of classical and seasonal pieces. But when I glanced down at the set list, my stomach dropped. There, at the very bottom, was a composition I had never seen before. The silent conductor, traditional. I had played in this orchestra for years, and I had never heard of it. I flipped through my sheet music, but the piece wasn't there. My stand partner, seeing my confusion, nudged me. "Hey, what's wrong?" she whispered. "Where's this last piece?" The silent conductor, she frowned. "What? That's not on the program." I turned the page toward her, but the title was gone. The last listed song was the one before it, our actual closing piece. I felt ice creep through my veins. The concert started, and I did my best to focus. The music filled the hall, erasing my unease, at least for a while. Then, during our final piece, it happened. Right as we reached the final swell of the song, the lights flickered. It was barely noticeable, just a quick dimming, but I saw it. And in that split second, something shifted in the air. The conductor hesitated. His hands faltered just for a moment. And in that moment, the audience felt deathly silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle, not even the rustling of a program. Complete, unnatural stillness. I gripped my violin tighter, my bow hovering just above the strings, my heart hammering. Then, without warning, the conductor's hands moved again. But not his hands. Someone else's. The way they floated, unnaturally smooth, as if pulled by invisible strings. I recognized them instantly, and the music continued. But it wasn't the song we had been playing. The notes were different, hollow, and wrong. The kind of melody that didn't belong to any known era, as if it had been plucked from somewhere older than time. My fingers moved on their own, following a rhythm I had never learned but somehow understood. My stand partner was staring straight ahead, eyes wide. No one else seemed aware that anything was amiss. The audience sat, motionless. The orchestra played, but no one was in control of their hands, except for him. I forced myself to look toward the conductor's podium. He was there, the same figure in the tailcoat, standing just behind our conductor. His hands glided above the real conductor's arms, manipulating him like a marionette, and he was smiling, not a grin, not a smirk, just a slow, stretching smile that never reached his eyes. I wanted to scream, to drop my violin and run, but my body wasn't my own anymore. My fingers kept playing, the bow kept gliding, and the music went on and on and on, until the final note rang out. The second the song ended, the audience breathed. It was as if they had been holding their breath the entire time, and suddenly, everything snapped back into place. The lights brightened, the air returned to normal. Our conductor blinked, looking dazed for a moment before turning back to us with his usual smile, oblivious to what had just happened. The audience erupted into applause. My stand partner leaned toward me, her voice barely audible over the cheers. "That wasn't your song." I nodded, throat dry. "I know. We never spoke about it again. I never played in that hall again, either. I quit the orchestra a month later, feigning school commitments. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I hear it. That melody. It drifts in at odd hours, creeping into the silence of my home. And when it does, I swear swear I feel something just behind me, watching, waiting. I never turn around. For years, I avoided music. I couldn't bring myself to touch my violin, let alone play it. Anytime I thought about picking it up, the memory of that night clawed its way back into my mind. The unnatural silence, the hollow melody, the way my body moved against my will. I tried convincing myself it had been a shared hallucination, some strange trick of the mind brought on by nerves. But then, little things started happening. I'd hear the melody when I shouldn't, not in my head, not as a memory out loud, a faint hum beneath the sound of passing cars, a whisper threading through the wind, the distant, ghostly echo of strings vibrating just at the edge of perception. It was never loud, never intrusive, just there, waited. Then, a few weeks ago, I received an email, alumni orchestra reunion, special performance in honor of our conductor. It had been nearly 5 years since I left the orchestra, and I hadn't kept in touch with many of the members. Apparently, our conductor was retiring, and they were hosting a final performance to celebrate his career. The moment I read it, my stomach twisted. I should have ignored it, should have deleted it and gone about my life, but instead, I found myself clicking on the event details. The concert was set to take place in the same hall, the same stage, and at the bottom of the program, just like before, was a final piece I had never seen before. The silent conductor, traditional. I closed my laptop and tried to shake the unease creeping up my spine. Maybe it was just a coincidence, a placeholder name, a joke by someone who remembered that eerie night, but I couldn't convince myself. Not when I started hearing it again, not in passing, not just at the edge of sound, clearly. One night, I woke up to it playing from somewhere inside my apartment. Faint, but unmistakable, a slow, creeping violin phrase, repeating over and over. I sat up, my breath frozen in my throat. The sound wasn't coming from outside, it was inside the room. I reached for my phone, but as soon as my fingers touched the screen, the music stopped. The air around me shifted, thick, heavy, like someone was standing just outside my vision, waiting for me to notice. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, a single, deliberate tap against the wood of my violin case. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and shot it toward the corner of the room. Nothing, just my violin case, exactly where I had left it, closed, untouched, but I knew better. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I sent an RSVP to the reunion concert, not because I wanted to go, because I had to, because I knew, deep in my gut, that if I didn't face whatever this was, it wouldn't stop. The night of the concert, the hall was packed, alumni members greeted each other warmly, and for the first time in years, I stepped back onto that stage. The feeling was immediate, that same crushing weight in the air, the quiet hum of something unseen lingering just at the edge of my senses. But it wasn't loud. As I tuned my violin, I noticed others shifting uncomfortably, eyes flicking toward the conductor's podium. Whispers passed between musicians, and I caught snippets of conversations. I swear I heard something weird during rehearsal. The program changed at the last minute. If you see the last piece, does anyone even have sheet music for it? I didn't. None of us did. And yet, when the final song began, we played. The moment the conductor raised his baton, our hands moved. Not by choice, not by memory, by something else. The music filled the hall. The same chilling melody from before, except this time it was different. Fuller, sharper, like it had been waiting for its true performance. The air grew thick, suffocating. The lights flickered, dimming to a sickly glow. And then, at the very back of the concert hall, I saw him, standing in the shadows, tall and unmoving, watching the silent conductor, his hands lifted, mirroring the real conductor's movements, his grin stretching impossibly wide. The audience didn't move, didn't react, they were frozen. The music built to a crescendo, the notes spiraling into something frantic, desperate. My heart pounded as my body played against my will. I realized then what this was. A ritual, a performance that had been waiting to be completed. We had played its first movement years ago, and now we were finishing it. The lights above the stage buzzed violently, and in that flickering chaos, I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. Behind the conductor, just beyond the edge of the podium, shadows twisted into the shape of grasping hands. They reached forward and clutching and collate. The real conductor staggered, his face twisted in confusion and horror, but he couldn't stop. His hands were no longer his own. The music swelled, louder, frenzied. Then, silence. The light snapped back to full brightness. The audience blinked, shifting in their seats as if waking from a daze. Our conductor stood motionless at the podium, his baton trembling in his grip. No one spoke, no one moved. Then, the audience erupted into applause. But not for us, not for the performance. Their claps were slow, measured, polite, like they were waiting, like they knew. I turned toward the back of the hall. He was gone, but I knew this wasn't over, because as I lowered my violin, my fingers trembled, and when I finally let go, I could still feel his hands guiding mine. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.